8 months later, when I was in Zwickau, there was someone there that I could not understand him at all. I had no idea what he was saying. He could understand me, but then he looks over at my companion and he says, "Is he brand new?"
This is Cold War Conversations. If you're new here, you've come to the right place to listen to first-hand Cold War history accounts. Do make sure you follow us in your podcast app so you don't miss out on any of the episodes. In the early 1980s, East Germany had 5,000 members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Most of them had been members since World War II. In 1982, East German leader Erich Honecker historically allowed the church to build a temple in Freiberg, and in 1988, Mormon missionaries were allowed into East Germany. Ken Brady describes his experiences as a Mormon missionary in East Germany as the country gradually disappeared and was absorbed into West Germany. Ken also gives us a valuable view of life away from Berlin in cities such as Cottbus, Gorlitz, Schwerin, Frankfurt and Oder and Eisenhüttenstadt. It's a fascinating story told with humour and candour as Ken grapples with local dialects, the local food and tricks with East German currency. Now, Cold War history is disappearing, but a simple monthly donation will help keep this podcast on the air and preserve Cold War history. You'll get the sought-after Cold War Conversations coaster as a thank you, and you'll bask in the warm glow of knowing that you are helping to preserve Cold War history.
Hi, I'm Andrew, and I'm very proud to support Cold War Conversations with a small donation each month because Ian's put together such a brilliant range of interviews. If you do support the podcast, your wallet will be a tiny bit lighter, but your brain will be very, very thankful.
Just go to coldwarconversations.com/donate to see the options. If a financial contribution is not your cup of tea, then you can still help us by leaving written reviews wherever you listen to us, as well as sharing us on social media. It really helps us get new guests on the show. I'm delighted to welcome Ken Brady to our Cold War conversation.
I was actually born into the church. My parents, my mother actually joined in Uruguay in South America, and she came to the United States, met my father in Salt Lake City, Utah, and then they were married just a few months later, which I think was pretty fast, but they both felt like it was the right thing to do. And so they raised me in the church, and I always felt like I was going to serve a mission. And even from the time I was a little boy, I thought it'd be great to go to East Germany, just because it was so mysterious, that we didn't know anything about it. We knew very little about the Eastern Bloc countries and things. So it was fun, because my mom would always ask me, "Where do you think you're going to go?" And I would always tell her that, and she would always respond with, "Well, we'll see." But ultimately it turned out to be right.
Yeah, why the fascination so young with East Germany?
I really don't know. I think some of it had to do with the Olympics. I always watched the Olympics on TV, and East Germany seemed to win a lot of medals, even for being such a small country. It seemed to win more than its share of medals, and came to find out later, of course, that they had some sort of a program to get people more athletic and that kind of a thing too, right? I didn't know that at the time. I just thought it was really fascinating, and I'm not sure exactly why I was interested in it so much, but it might have been that.
I think people were intrigued by, East Germany's performance at Olympic Games was, I guess it was suspect, because you just thought, how can a small country like this generate so many incredible athletes? Right. But I guess at the time, the testing technology wasn't as effective as it is now. So that fascination continued into your 20s or late teens, and so therefore you volunteered to the church to be a missionary.
Yes, yeah, and I don't know if you're familiar with the process there, but the way that it works is you submit an application. You indicate there's a couple of questions on there that they ask about whether you would whether you already speak another language besides English, and then whether you feel like you could learn another language on top of that. And of course, I spoke Spanish, with my mother being from Uruguay. She taught me Spanish, so I grew up speaking both Spanish and English. And I indicated that I would be delighted to learn another language too. So you submit your paperwork in there, and then it goes off to the headquarters in Salt Lake City. And then within a couple of weeks, you get a letter back from them indicating where you're going to go. And you get the choice there to say, I'll go ahead and accept the call, or you can say, well, I'll think about it or something. You can decide not to. But originally, my call was to Switzerland, Spanish speaking. I was going to be serving in Zurich, speaking Spanish to, I guess they have a lot of immigrants there in Zurich. And so when I got my assignment, I read it out loud to my mom, and she couldn't believe it. She thought I was joking with her. And so she actually took the letter out of my hand and said, let me see that. And so she actually read it for herself. And but it was eye-opening for me. I didn't expect to get that. But and then I thought, well, I guess I'm not going to East Germany. But when you receive your call, the next thing that happens after you accept it is they tell you what day to report to the missionary training center. And that's where you spend about 8 weeks learning the language and learning how to preach and how to proselytize and that kind of a thing. If you're learning a new language, it's about 10 hours a day of pretty intense language study. So you come away speaking fluent, German or whatever language it would be. And about a month into the time that I was there, I received a change in my assignment because they were opening up the East German mission, and they wanted to have new missionaries from Provo come there. So then I wrote home and said, yep, I'm going to East Germany anyway.
Brilliant. I mean, I was really surprised to hear that the church started operations in East Germany in March 1989, so before the wall opened. How were they allowed to operate in East Germany?
That's a really interesting question there, because there were already members of the church who were there from the 1840s, 1850s, when the church originally started sending missionaries to Germany. Of course, it was all one country back then. And so there were a handful of members that were already there, maybe 4,000 to 5,000 that were already there, whose parents and grandparents had been there. And at one point, the church kept having talks with Erich Honecker and some of the other East German officials there, kept asking them permission to, can we please proselytize? Can we please allow our members to practice their religion here? And one of the things that they really wanted to do was to build a temple. And for us, having temple service is something that we do once a month, something like that. And then we go to church on Sundays. And by allowing them to build a temple in East Germany, that would also allow people in other Eastern Bloc countries, Poland, Czech Republic, or Czechoslovakia back then, even further east, to be able to have access to temple work as well. And when our church president, Thomas S. Monson, met with Erich Honecker, he finally told him, he wasn't the president of the church at the time, but he was one of the quorum of the 12 apostles there. He mentioned to him, hey, we know your people. We followed them. We've seen them. We trust you. And one of the things that they really liked was in some of our scripture, it tells us that we should be good citizens of the country that we live in. And, we should be respectful of the laws. We should work towards being good people of our countries and that kind of a thing. And they were really inspired by that. So they gave them permission to build a temple in Freiberg. It's kind of in the Erzgebirge nation area of the nation. And after that, I guess just a few years later, they allowed them to bring some missionaries over. The first group of them came, I believe, from Hamburg, and some from the other areas of West Germany. Eventually, they brought in some from Austria as well. And they were not allowed to preach openly, but they were allowed to visit with members. And if a member of the church had a friend visiting, they could teach them, but they were not allowed to go out in the public square and on the streets and talk and that kind of a thing. But yeah, starting in March of 89 already. And then we arrived in February of 90, almost a year later.
I mean, with my sort of knowledge of East Germany, I can imagine that Erich Honecker was also attracted by some hard currency investment in the country from
probably.
the church as well.
Probably. Yeah, probably so. Yeah. The exchange rate was very favorable for us. I mean, we could get 5 East marks for every dollar. And that certainly had some kind of effect on their decision, I'm sure. Yeah.
No, intriguing. I had no idea that, they were, that this happened, well, not well before, but at least 8 months before the wall opened. So you're learning your German and you're ready to go. How do you get to East Germany?
So we took a flight from, I guess we left pretty early in the morning. I remember it was maybe 5 or 6 in the morning, something like that. We go to the airport and we take a flight from Salt Lake City to Dallas, and we took another flight from Dallas on Lufthansa. We flew from Dallas all the way to Frankfurt, and we had a little bit of a layover in Frankfurt, Frankfurt am Main, I should mention, not Frankfurt Oder, which is on the eastern side of the country. We had a little bit of a layover there, a couple of hours, I believe, and I just remember being totally exhausted at the airport, sitting there falling asleep, basically. For some reason, I'm not able to sleep on a plane, and I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm just too nervous or something, but we were sitting there at the airport, and a couple of the missionaries that I was with actually brought a family over to talk to me, who was from somewhere in Central America. And so I spoke to them in Spanish and told them what we were doing and offered them a free Book of Mormon. I didn't have one in Spanish at the time, but yeah, so we were there talking with them. And after a little while, we took another flight from Frankfurt into Leipzig, and that was on an East German airline. And you could tell it was quite different. It did not, I mean, it looked clean, but it looked old. And I was wondering, is this plane going to survive the flight? I sure hope so. But we landed in Leipzig, and it was quite the culture shock to land there in Leipzig airport. There was no shops, there was very little light. It was kind of almost an industrial look to it, and the everything from the way that the baggage came out, and going through customs and all that, I didn't really know what I was getting into, just because it looked kind of old and looked very, very Spartan. Really, it was just not very decorated very well, not very colorful, but kind of eye opening to me. My bag actually broke somewhere along the flight, so they had taped it closed with a lot of tape. I don't know if I was missing anything.
Probably all those books you were carrying, Ken.
Yeah, could have been. Yeah. Actually, we were told to bring a lot of vitamins with us. So I had probably 5 or 6 bottles of vitamins.
Right. Okay. And what was the security like then? I mean, were the, was it just standard airport security or quite light touch from what you remember?
From what I remember, it was more than I remember from the United States. But it was like we literally did not want to see anybody look at anybody in the eye or anything, because we did not want to be suspicious or anything like that. But I think out of the corner of my eye, I could see that there were some heavily armed guards at different places and things. But I don't remember too much about that, except that I was trying to focus on not saying anything stupid. Not getting myself in trouble.
Yeah.
So
this was March 1990. So this is 6 months after the walls opened and before Unification, which was October of that year, and before the first free elections as well. So at this point, the GDR still existed. Obviously, there was quite a lot of internal turmoil about what path they were going to go down. Was the Party of Democratic Socialism had formed from the remains of the Communist Party at that point. So, but the functions of the country were still operating. Yes. There was still the People's Police was still on the streets, and the army was still there.
Yes, yeah. A lot of times we still saw Russian soldiers everywhere, and a lot of the restaurants would offer Russian food, and sometimes we even saw, Russian tanks and military machinery driving by, just random days, just, I do remember one time I took a picture of a building I thought was interesting, and I never got that picture back, and I found out that was a military installation of some kind. So, yes, I never saw that one again.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I travelled to Eastern Europe in the early 80s, and that was sort of lesson one. Don't take photos of bridges, railway stations, or any military installation. If you value the film in your camera, or your camera for that matter, to be fair.
That's right. That's right.
So where was your first posting?
So my very first city was Cottbus. It's kind of close to the Polish border and just a little bit north of the Czech border as well. And their football team is Cottbus Energie, which means energy, Cottbus. I don't know if they have nuclear energy there, but most of it was coal energy. And I remember we lived with a family who were members of the church. We actually rented a room upstairs in their home. And one day, my companion I was with, he had been serving in Austria for a while, and so he came from Austria when he was stationed with me. And I remember one morning he said, "Hey, the coal has arrived. We've got to go fill the basement with coal. So let's go outside and help out." And so I'm standing there shoveling some coal, and I didn't have any experience with coal. I had no idea that we used just electric power where I grew up, but so I'm shoveling some coal and dumping it in the little window in the basement, and I thought that was kind of fun, pretty interesting.
Yeah, you sent me a great photo of you shoveling the coal, actually, and we'll be sharing the photos in the episode notes. There's some great images of East Germany there, Ken. I'm really grateful you sent those through to me.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
How did you cope with local dialects, Ken?
That was very difficult, actually. I don't know how much history people know about Germany, but it's only been a unified country since the 1870s, and before that, it was little principalities and kingdoms and things that everybody had their own sort of language and dialect. And the first exposure I had to it, I did not understand anything. They could understand me, but what we were taught in the missionary training center was what they call Hochdeutsch, or High German. And that's the easiest one to understand. It's the most common. Everybody understands you when you speak Hochdeutsch. But when I was there, I guess this part of Germany, I think, was Saxon, and or may have been Brandenburg. But anyway, when I went there, I really had no idea what they were saying. And the first person I talked to, we had these little surveys that we conducted. So we would ask people questions like, "Do you believe in God? Have you heard of Jesus Christ? Do you have a Bible in your home?" Those kinds of things. And the first person that we talked to, he would answer some of these questions, and I'd have to look over at my companion to see, should I move on? And every now and then he would nod and say, "Go to the next question." And so I'd ask the next one. But it was difficult. After a while, you started to pick up a little bit of the local dialects, but the next biggest challenge I had was maybe 8 months later when I was in Zwickau, which is part of Saxon, and there was someone there that I could not understand him at all. I had no idea what he was saying. No idea what he was saying. He could understand me, but then he looks over at my companion and he says, "Is he brand new?" And he says, "No, he's been here as long as I have, but just doesn't understand Sächsisch." So.
Yeah. Wow. What was the story with the family you were staying with? I mean, they'd been part of the church all their lives. Did they have stories of, how difficult it had been in the past to worship and keep the religion going? Yeah,
they did. They shared with us quite a few stories. In fact, her brother had emigrated to West Berlin, or right before the wall was built. And so she hadn't seen him in, 25 or 30 years, something like that. And then she also had a sister who had moved to the United States. I believe she went to West Berlin as well, and then went to the United States from that point. So it was difficult for them because they didn't have a building to meet in, so they would have to find someone's home that they could meet with. And usually, what they would do, just so that the people wouldn't, I guess so that the secret police wouldn't find them, is they would arrive at different times, not all coming at the same time, because that would constitute a gathering, and which was liable to attract attention. So Sometimes what they would have to do as well is some of the church documents, like books and pamphlets and things, they would have to memorize those and pass them around from one home to another, so that if somebody came to search their home, they wouldn't find them, that kind of a thing. So it was very difficult. It was pretty eye-opening to me, because I had never heard of such a thing. Growing up in Utah, I thought that everybody had freedom of religion. I thought that was no big deal, right? But yeah, it was pretty eye-opening to me.
Yeah, yeah. What sort of jobs did they do? What were their?
I don't remember exactly what they did for a living. I know she didn't work. I think he was an engineer of some kind. But yeah, one of the things that they did tell me was that if you are a believer in God, then you can't be a member of the party. And if you're not a member of the party, you can't progress in your work most of the time. Most of the plant managers and things would all be party members. And so they, just did the best they could with what they had. He was fortunate enough that they were actually able to buy their own home, large enough to have a bedroom that the missionaries could rent from them. But I don't remember exactly what kind of work he did. He might have been involved with in the energy industry. Maybe, I don't remember.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, were people worried about the Stasi still at this point, or were they? Yeah. Even 6 months after the wall had opened.
Yeah. They were still concerned about that, mostly because, as you mentioned earlier about the free elections, until that actually happened, most people were still afraid that it could revert back, and that some of the freedoms that they were just enjoying at that point could be going away. So they were definitely concerned about that.
How did you get around, Ken? Did you have a car?
In my first city, we did. Yeah, we had a Volkswagen Polo. I think they may be called a Volkswagen Fox. And compared to what the East Germans drove, every time we would drive around and park the car, we'd always have a crowd of people gathering, because they'd never seen anything like this. They had never seen a Volkswagen before. And they were used to the Trabants, which are kind of they're like little squarish boxes made out of compressed particle board and wool and paper and whatever else. It was just weird. But yeah, my first city, we had the Volkswagen Polo. And then most of the rest of the cities that I served in, we either took public transportation or, we did a lot of walking. But a lot of our missionaries around the world will have bikes. But and for whatever reason, in our mission, we didn't have bikes. We just, the public transportation was really up to date. It was really good and really, really effective. So we were able to get around everywhere that way.
Yeah, because one of the things that did attract me to your story is that you were quite a way off the beaten track as far as where most visitors would go. I mean, Cottbus, Zwickau, Frankfurt on Oder, Gera, they're quite, I don't want to put them down too much, but they were quite obscure places and certainly not tourist destinations.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. There weren't a lot of visitors, not a lot of tourists. We saw a lot of them when we went to Berlin, obviously in Leipzig. We visited there, Dresden. We saw a lot of tourists there, but yeah, most of the time we were the only Americans anybody had ever seen.
Why were these locations chosen for missionary work? How were they selected?
That's a good question. I'm not sure exactly how they did that, but I know that a lot of our congregations were there. So we had a fairly large congregation in Leipzig. We had some in Zwickau, where I was at. We had a small, really tiny group of maybe only like 30 or 40 members at the very most. I think that one of the reasons that they chose these areas was because they wanted to increase membership there. They wanted to get some converts, and others was because we were there to support the members in their church service as well. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. You want to put people where there are members, but at the same time, in order to grow the church, you want to put them where there are not a lot of members too. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, interested whether, the thought was, because these were quite heavy industrial areas from what I could make out, whether it was thought to be a more fertile recruiting ground. I know you wouldn't call it that, but that, to gain members.
that raises an interesting point there too, because one of the things that is a real factor in being able to gain converts is to find people who are humble and find people who are willing to be teachable, that are willing to be taught, that are willing to listen, and that kind of thing. So yeah, a lot of times you'll find that with just the working class people. So we wouldn't find a lot of that among the higher levels of society in a lot of ways, right? So yeah, that could have had something to do with it as well.
Yeah. When you were out, did you eat out? I mean, did you use local restaurants and bars?
Yeah,
I'm sure you've got some stories of those, Ken.
Yeah, actually, we did. We did, especially at first, because as we mentioned, it was very inexpensive for us as Americans to go there. Very, very favorable exchange rate. We would get 5 East marks for every dollar, and so it was. We actually were instructed to go to restaurants quite a bit for a couple of reasons, and one of them was because we could strike up conversations with people as they were having lunch with us. And I don't know if this is similar to everywhere in Europe, but we could sit at tables wherever we wanted, and some people who were not even part of our party would be sitting on the same table with us, and we could just have a conversation with them. But then another reason too was because the restaurants would be the place where you could actually get fresh vegetables more than you could at the grocery stores. And so even though it was fairly inexpensive for us to go shopping at a grocery store, we had a better selection if we would go to a restaurant. And culturally, it was kind of a different thing for us too, because we didn't know that the tips were included in the price of the restaurant. And so a lot of times we would just leave the change. It would come out to be 7 marks and 20 cents or whatever. We'd leave 8 or 9 or 10 marks sometimes. Yeah, just keep the rest. Not a big deal. So we would eat fish, we'd eat pork, we'd eat whatever they had plus whatever vegetables they had there, and usually spend only about $4 or $5. So it was very inexpensive for us.
Wow. And in those early days, as you say, being an American in Cottbus would have been quite a novelty. So I guess word got round that the Americans were in town.
Yeah. There was one man that we met that was running like a little. It was like I guess you would call that an imbus, or it was like a food cart kind of a thing. And he found out that we were Americans. He said, "Oh, I need you to try this." And so I was just going to order some sausage or something, but he had made up this hamburger. And he said, "Here, have a hamburger. This is what I recommend to you." And to me, it was odd. It was more like they had taken the sausage casing and just emptied it and made a patty out of it and fried that, which wasn't quite what I expected. But I said, I'm going to go ahead and stick with the German food for now. But yeah, he was quite proud of himself. He says, "This is the best hamburger you've had since you left the States, I'm sure."
And were people suspicious of you as to who you were and whether you were up to any bad stuff?
Yeah. They almost everybody thought we were CIA. It was pretty interesting. Sometimes we would have really interesting conversations with people who were mostly drunk because they didn't care that we were CIA. Or they were not concerned about it. I remember one time we visited a man, and he just pulled out his harmonica and just started playing. And we listened to his music for about 20 or 30 minutes, and then we said, "Well, that's very nice. We'll talk to you later." And he obviously was not able to have a conversation with us because he was just too far gone. But such a nice man, such an interesting fellow.
Yeah, I mean, just being in those parts of East Germany at this moment in time, within 6 months, it was going to transform completely. And, you were there in that moment. So you must very much treasure some of these scenes and characters and converts that you had.
Absolutely. There. Yeah. Some memories I'm never going to forget.
Yeah. Because in Forst, I think there was a teenager who taught you a lot about Trabants.
Yeah. He actually worked at the Trabant shop, and he was the one who told me how they made them and everything. And told me that they were 27 horsepower, which didn't mean much to me at the time, but we have lawnmowers that have more horsepower than that. So, so that was interesting. But yeah, and then he gave me a little symbol of the, from the front of the car and said, "Here, you can have this." And yeah, he was a good kid. He was probably 18 years old at the time, 17 or 18. I've since had contact with him. He still remembers me, or at least he did, 15 years ago, last time I talked to him.
Wow.
Yeah, he was happy to. I think he's now working in West Germany for a car maker in West Germany, but I don't remember exactly what he does. So.
Brilliant. Love those sort of stories. Did you sort of get settled into the whole GDR lifestyle? And, because it sounds like, you ate in the restaurants, you went in the bars, you weren't looking for hard currency shops all the time to get a Coke or something like that.
No, we
I'm not sure there'd be that many in Cottbus
probably weren't.
To be fair.
There probably weren't. But it's interesting you mentioned the soft drinks there, because they had one called Maracuya, which is kind of, I think we have something similar in the United States called Squirt. But this is more tart, and it's more has more carbonation in it. But I came to develop a real taste for it. I really liked it. It came in this really, really dark brown bottle, which at one point when my companion handed me one and said, "Here, try this." I said, "That looks like beer to me. This is kind of interesting." He says, "No, it's just maracuya. Try this." And it was very, very, it was very tart, a lot more tart than I expected. But yeah, we eventually got used to the culture and got used to the selection of food and things, and we just started to fit in. We enjoyed it.
Yeah. What was the drink made of? This drink?
I think it's something called gooseberries. I think.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. They're like green.
Yeah, green,
they look
like
little...
green blueberries, but larger.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. They're very tart, and I wish we could find it again, because I'd love to share it with people and say, "This is what we used to drink."
Yeah.
So...
Yeah. Were there any other drinks? Did you try the East German cola that they had? Vita Cola, I think it was called.
No, actually, I never did. I was not brave enough to try that. So, but yeah, I did have a couple of my companions that did try it every now and then, just to see what it was like. But of course, that was until about, I guess, when they unified the currencies in June. That was the end of it. We couldn't find any more East German products after that, because they just didn't sell them. Yeah.
Yeah, and we will come on to that in a moment. I was quite intrigued, because you sent me some notes, which has been a real goldmine of stories in there. But I did like the innovative way you had of running a bet about the properties of East German coins.
Yes, that was really fun. I had heard that they actually float, because they're made out of aluminum, and they float on water. And so at one point, I don't remember who showed me this, but somebody showed me this, and that if you could take some East German coins, and you just kind of lay them flat in a basin of water, they float. And even the larger ones, like the 2 mark pieces that they had, which pretty large actually, but even those will float. And you don't have to add anything to the water. You just fill up a bowl with water, and you just lay it in there, and they float. And so I actually was every now and then I would bet some of the other missionaries. I'd say, "I bet you I can make your coins float in that water," and they would say, "No, you can't." Like, okay, I'll do it. So I won several bets doing that. So, it was kind of fun. They were surprised. Yeah. Even some of the members that we said didn't believe it at first, but they after a while they all just laughed, because they knew of just how silly it was.
Yeah, I mean, people joke about that East German currency, but it sure didn't wear out your pockets. I mean,
no.
It was great to carry around a pocket full of change.
Yeah, it wasn't bad at all.
Did you have spare time, or were you always on the job when you were out and about?
We had one day a week that we could use as what we called our preparation day, which would be the day when we can go shopping, or we could do our laundry, and we could do some sightseeing as well. And one of my favorite trips that I took at that time was to a place called Spreewald, which is kind of it's a little area just north of Cottbus, which is the river runs through. There's lots of canals and things like that, and so some members took us there to look at it and everything. I thought it was beautiful. It was a really beautiful area. And then I did get I don't believe I sent you this picture, but I did get a painting that one of the members actually gave me of the Spreewald area, and it's hanging up on my wall downstairs. My wife, I showed it to my wife. She was really impressed, but yeah, it was enjoyable to be able to go and see that. And sometimes we go see museums and things. A lot of times we would see things that we never thought we would ever see. And Berlin has fantastic museums, and we saw a lot of Roman and Greek sculptures and all kinds of paintings and things, and even things from Egypt. And it was just really incredible and very eye-opening, for me to be able to see these things.
Yeah, no, the Spreewald, I've never been to the Spreewald, but I've seen the photos of it. But I think it's famous for its pickle, isn't it? The Spreewald pickle.
Yeah.
Did you try some of those?
I actually did. Yeah, I loved it. I pretty much liked all the food that I had in East Germany, but yeah, the pickles were great. Yeah.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hi there, Vic here from MedHeadosNet Podcast. If you're a lover of ancient history, I'm sure you know about the Romans, the Greeks, the Parthians, the Egyptians, and all the great empires you learned about in high school. Well, what if I tell you there's one country and people who had the biggest influence on these great empires, yet you never heard about their story? Yes, the Great Armenian Empires. Join me and my co-host Mike as we take you on a journey through history the great Armenian kingdoms, culture, and their contribution to the birth of civilization as we know it today. Listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform.
In, I think, March 1990 also, you have a visit to Berlin, and you see there quite a contrast with what you've been seeing out in the provinces. Can you describe the contrast that you saw there?
So the biggest difference I saw was just how much newer the buildings were, and it just and a lot of people, obviously, the streets were wider, lots of cars everywhere. But you could tell that that's where the East German government spent most of their money, to make it kind of the crown jewel of East Germany. And, that's where all the visitors came to see. That's where the government offices were and everything. One of the things that I noticed was, I don't know if you've heard this story before, but there's a TV tower in East Berlin, which they now call the Pope's Revenge, or at least they did back then. Maybe they still do. I don't know. But the top of the TV tower is just like this sphere, and when the sun shines on it, you see the reflection of a cross in the windows there. And it's I saw that when I went to Berlin there, and I asked people about it, or just thought it was interesting. They said, "Did you notice something about the windows up there?" It's like, "Yeah, they make a cross." He says, "Yeah, they call that the Pope's Revenge because at one point there was a cathedral that was built on that spot, and during the war it was destroyed, and so the East German government took some money that the Catholic Church had given them, and they rebuilt this TV tower instead." So they tried for years and years to wipe that off and to try to polish it or paint it or something, but eventually they gave up because they couldn't get rid of it. And so even today, you go to Berlin and you see that on the eastern side, and it just has the cross on there. It's really, I thought that was fascinating. But yeah, it was quite the culture shock to go from some of the smaller towns that I was in to Berlin and just see how much money they must have spent on these buildings, and just making the city as beautiful as they could.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you were traveling around, were you invited into people's homes, so you saw the way that they lived and the homes? Can you describe some of those home visits that you did?
Yeah, so we most of the time we would be invited over for dinner at the members' homes. We would have lunch with them or dinner, and some of the things I noticed, just the very humble circumstances that they lived in. They didn't have a lot of furniture. The furniture was it wasn't very ornate, right? It was just functional. The members themselves were very fantastic people. They were so willing to give us anything that they had, willing to share, and just really nice people. just really loved us and everything. The food was always delicious, even though it was kind of, I'm not sure how to describe the meals that we ate, but they were not very elaborate. They were just, just meals and things. None of the homes of the members that I visited had telephones, except for just a handful. Maybe I can think of maybe 4 or 5 people that I knew that had a telephone in their home the whole 2 years that I was there. Very small televisions. Sometimes they would have just a few books, not a lot of books and everything, just small apartments and things. But people were always willing to let us in. And I actually was serving there in the summer of 1990 as well, when the World Cup was going on. And when that was going on, then we would knock on someone's door. They would always invite us in if we were going to watch the football with them. But if we said that we had a message from God, they would say, well, okay, go away. We're going to watch the game. But so it was interesting. It was a good time to be there.
So they're watching the football. Are they still supporting East Germany at this point?
Yes, but they
team.
But then they also started to switch over to West Germany. Some of the fans were just happy to have Germany do so well, and they knew that, or I think some people knew that by the end of the summer that they probably would be unified again, because there was a lot of discussion about that, a lot of talk about whether they wanted to. So I don't know. I don't remember exactly which dates that was. I know it was in the summer when they had the World Cup, but by the fall, they'd be unified again. So a lot of people saw that on the horizon, and so they just decided to jump on board with the West German team. Yeah.
And what was it like when the free elections were announced? What sort of reaction did you see with that?
Yeah, that was very, very interesting, because all of a sudden, just out of the blue, there were all these political parties. And, just every kind of party you could think of. There were probably a dozen of them. I'm not even sure how many. And we saw ads for, different advertising all over the cities for different parties and everything. And most of the people didn't have any idea which party they should vote for. And so a lot of times we would talk to people, and we would go visit them in their homes or whatever. And they would ask us, is this how it is in America too, where you have so many different choices? It's like, well, typically in America, we have 2 parties. Typically we have a few others, but a little smaller ones. But yeah, it was hard for them to understand that freedom meant choices. You can choose different things, and you were not going to be told which one you had to choose. And so a lot of times they would ask us, how do I decide which party to vote for? It's like, well, you just kind of have to study them and make up your mind. But yeah, that was a very exciting time to be around. I mean, that was such a discussion point for so many people, and one of the things that they always wanted to talk to us about was just to get some guidance on, which party they should consider, and do you think it makes a difference to God which party I vote for, and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, well, I wasn't really prepared to talk about that. So, yeah, that was, but it was interesting. It's just something completely new for them. And kind of going along with that too, when they started getting the West German products into the country, very similar circumstances there, with different kinds of cereals that they could buy, or different kinds of foods and things. And they just were all of a sudden they were faced with different decisions they had to make, like which brand do I use, and why are there so many different kinds? It's like, well, you just try it and find out what you like, and then buy it again if you like it. So.
Yeah, I always find this period of East German history fascinating, because it's like your whole world has been turned upside down, and you're almost having to learn a completely new way of living. And you get the impression that quite a few people were vulnerable to tricksters and all sorts that were coming over and exploiting them and selling them stuff that they didn't need, but they were told that they needed. I mean, I can't even imagine what that would be like. It's almost like, reaching your early teenage years and suddenly you're fast forwarded into adulthood or something. Do you know what I mean? It's really tough.
It was a very stark difference. Yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned that too, because the very first, when we were first there talking to people, everybody was very open to learn things about the West, about religion or about politics or just anything that came from the West, because it was so guarded before. Like they couldn't get any information from the West, from the United States or from Western Europe or anything. And at some point we could tell this was probably maybe 6 or 7 months afterwards, we could tell that people started to get a little jaded, because there were people that came in, like you were saying, that sold them products that they didn't need and trying to take advantage of them in a lot of ways. And at some point, when they started to realize that, it was much more difficult for us to get into homes just to tell them, we're here to talk about our religion. We're hoping to teach you about the Book of Mormon and what you think about that. Just get your thoughts about the Bible and about Christianity and how you feel about things. And a lot of times people wouldn't believe us. They thought we were trying to sell them something, or we were trying to take advantage of them, because they'd seen so many bad examples before. So I think that had a tremendous effect on us. We had it was almost night and day. At one point it was very easy to get into everybody's homes and talk to them. And then at some point later, I would say probably by November, December of 1990, it was very difficult to get into people's homes. And it was much more difficult at that point.
Yeah. I just want to talk about some of the other areas you went to, because I was interested to hear that you were coming across people who'd had no experience of religion at all. Yeah. So, I mean, where do you start in that conversation with them if they don't even really know where you're coming from?
That's it was difficult, right? I mean, in some ways, you have difficulties both ways, right? If people know too much, sometimes it's hard because they're like, oh, I know enough. I'm gone. I'm done. And in some ways, when you would talk to people who had no experience with God, no experience with the Bible at all or anything like that, we pretty much start our discussions with them talking about God, that we believe that He is truly our Heavenly Father, that all of us are brothers and sisters here on earth, and we're all just trying to do the best that we can. And so you kind of have to start with some basic understanding about who God is and why we're here on earth and what we're trying to do, and why He's concerned about us. You talk about prayer. You talk about exercising your faith through prayer and that kind of a thing. And then when you get to that point, then we can move on to the next step, which is talking about Jesus Christ, who came to earth to save us from our sins if we follow Him, and if we do what He asks us to do, then we'll be blessed and that kind of a thing. So you just kind of have to start really, really small with some of these folks. I do remember we taught one man who had never prayed before in his life, and he didn't have any concept of the Bible or anything like that. So we shared some scriptures with him and told him that God loved him and that He wanted to hear from Him. We taught him how to pray, and at the end of the lesson that we had with him, this is the only time on my mission where this happened. I asked, we always ask the convert or the potential convert we're talking to, we always ask them if they want to say the prayer at the end of our meeting, and almost always they say no, thank you. Because they're just a little nervous. But this man said, yeah, I think I'll try it. And so we gave him a little bit of coaching, and he said a prayer, a beautiful prayer. And you could tell that he was praying from his heart. He really wanted to know if God existed, and he wanted to know if what we were telling him was true. And we asked him how he felt afterwards, and he said it was like the calm after a storm at sea. And I thought that was a beautiful way to describe it. Just how much his life had changed just by that one thing. And I always remember that. I don't remember exactly where that man lived, but he was on the Polish border somewhere. I don't remember if it was Eisenhüttenstadt or if it was Frankfurt, Oder, or what, but it was somewhere in there. And unfortunately, we never saw the man again. I don't know if he moved away or what happened, but I never saw him again. I hope to this day that he still has his faith, that he's progressing through his life, but never had the chance to meet him again.
Yeah. No, that's a great story. Great story. How many converts did you sort of recruit? I'm using the wrong phraseology here, but you know what I mean. Yeah. How many people did you get to sign up out there?
So my companion and I together, we ended up with 22 baptisms during the 2 years that I was there, which it's compared to most of Western Europe, that's a very high number. A typical mission in West Germany would, or anywhere in Western Europe for that matter, usually would have 2 or maybe 3, something like that. And a lot of the converts that we had were actually from Mozambique or from Angola, and they were there on kind of a worker visa from there in East Germany, and they were very, very faithful people. And the interesting thing about that is they spoke Portuguese, but they didn't speak very much German. And since I had spoken Spanish growing up, and Spanish and Portuguese are fairly similar, they're fairly close. I don't know how close they are compared to like Irish and Scottish or something like that, but I could still understand them fairly well, and they understood me fairly well too. So we were able to teach them, and the original, as I mentioned, the original assignment that I had was to be teaching in Spanish, and so I was able to still teach them in Spanish, which I thought was fascinating. But yeah, a lot of the converts, I'd say probably half of the converts I had were Africans.
Yeah, because East Germany had quite a lot of them over there working. And were they concerned about their status post unification?
Oh yeah,
people.
Yes, yeah. After unification, they all had to go home, and they all left. I believe it was the end of September. I think before the country's unified, they all had to leave, and so we had a special conference with them, and the mission president was there speaking. He actually asked me to interpret for him, so he could speak German and I would speak Spanish to the members who were there, and to the African converts who were there. And we had a really special meeting, and he was able to tell them that that the church didn't really have much of a presence in Mozambique or Angola at the time. And so they would be on their own for a little bit until we could actually send more missionaries there to kind of strengthen the church there. And I've lost contact with all of them. I don't know exactly where they are or anything, but very, very faithful people, very good people.
Yeah. How was relationships with the Lutheran Church while you were there? I mean, were they sort of like, what are these guys doing muscling in on our patch?
That's a good question. I didn't really come across that too much. I did meet a man once who actually lived in one of the church steeples, which I thought was an interesting place to live. But we met him on the street, and he said, "Oh, I'd love to talk to you." And he was Lutheran. And we walked into he pulled out a key from his pocket and opened the door to the church. I thought, we're going into the church? This is great. And then we went up about 300 stairs, and he had a little apartment there at the top of the stairs, just a little room with a lot of books, and he probably had multiple translations of the Bible there. And he told us that he was glad that we were there. He told us that he was glad we were helping to convert people to Christianity at all, just because it was a very difficult thing for them to do themselves. But I've never met a man who knew the Bible, knew the New Testament better than this man did. He was just really, really well versed. And we were often told that if we meet someone like that, rather than engage in some sort of a Bible bash, well, this verse says this and this verse says that, that doesn't help anybody, right? The best thing we can do is just tell them this is what we were trying to teach people, and if you're interested, we'll teach you some more, and if not, then we'll kind of go on our way. But he seemed to be very appreciative of us being there, because in his view, by us being there in his city and teaching people, knocking on doors and asking them if they had heard of God and if they had heard of the Bible, that it actually would help them too. That people would start to return to their church. So at least for this man, it seemed like a good thing.
Yeah. No, it's just intrigued what the Lutherans would have thought of you showing up. Now, one of the stories I really liked was the story of the factory worker in Gorlitz.
Oh yes, yes, that was an eye-opening experience, if I could to say the least. So my companion and I were just I don't remember what day it was. It could have been a Tuesday or Wednesday. It was just sometime during the week, around 11 o'clock or so. We were out on the street talking with people that we would meet on the street, and we would just tell them who we were and what we were doing there. And I saw this man and his wife, and they were out, just shopping kind of in an open area market. And I asked him, oh, you off today? Or, what's going on today? And he says, oh, well, no, I'm actually working. And I asked him, are you working right now? And he says, well, I work in that factory up there. And so I was very intrigued. I was like, what kind of job does he do? Is he doing like some sort of, competitive research kind of a thing? I don't know what he was doing there, but something, And he says, no, actually I work in the factory, but they didn't have enough work for me today. So they allowed me to go home. And I, as I was talking and asking more questions to this man, it turned out that when he graduated from school and completed his apprenticeship and all that he was sent to work at this factory. And when he got there, the factory plant manager said, well, we don't have enough work for you. So you can go ahead and sit in this chair, in this stool over here in the corner. And when we have enough work, we'll let you know, and you can come and work. And so every day he would bring his lunch, and he would bring, a newspaper, or he'd bring a comic book or something, a crossword puzzle, something like that. And he would sit on this chair and he would just read and do whatever until they asked him to work. And then he finally said to his manager, he said, I have an idea. How about I just stay home, and then you just let me know and send for me when you need me to come in and work. And the manager said, okay, yeah, that's fine. And he never went back. And he was still collecting a paycheck. And I had never heard of this before. I mean, I'm 19 years old, and I'd never heard of people getting paid not to work. That was just such an interesting thing. And my companion I was with, we could not believe it. I cannot believe that this is happening. So.
Yeah. Well, full employment in East Germany, and definition of employment is somewhat different to perhaps our definition of employment. Yeah. But great story. Story. So the currency unification is July the 1st, 1990.
Yes.
What was the day like? Because from what I understand is all the shops closed the day before.
Yes.
And then open the next day with all West German goods in.
Yes. Yeah, it was interesting. They closed earlier than usual. I believe probably early afternoon is when they closed. And we could tell that there was a difference in how the city felt. I was in Schwerin at the time, I think. That's where I was, and we were walking along the streets, and the days in Schwerin during the summer are really, really long. Like the sun doesn't go down, it seems like, until 11 o'clock at night or something. But we were just kind of walking the streets, talking to people as we usually do, and I noticed some of the shops along the side of the road there that just closed early, and you could look through the windows and see, and people were working inside, and they were filling up the shops. They took off all of the East German products, everything that they had, they took them all off, and I think they threw them all away. They just got rid of everything, and then they started putting out all the West German products, and there were people that were joining us, just looking through the window, watching all these different things coming up on the shelves, and different kinds of breakfast cereals and different kinds of bread and all that kind of stuff. Just from one day to the next, it was, you could buy anything from East Germany you wanted, and then the next day you could buy anything you wanted from West Germany. And it was very, very strange. It was like a total change in the city, and just in the way that people felt about things. And people spent a lot more time in the shops, started looking at different products and things. And, one thing too that we didn't really quite mention, was that before all of this, sometimes there would be outages of different products in the East German shops. And so a lot of times people would just get in line. They would see a line, outside a store, and they would go get in line, and people would say, I don't know what's at the end of this line, but there must be something good because there's a line forming. It could be bananas, it could be oranges, it could be, it could be anything, it could be chocolates or whatever. And after the currency union, they didn't have that anymore, because, if you were out of cornflakes, well, that's okay. We'll go ahead and buy Frosted Flakes instead, whatever, So it was very different, and you could tell the feeling in the city was much different after that, because people were so much more excited about what they could buy and what they could get in these stores. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah. Again, it's sort of like you've only ever had one or two brands of coffee before, and suddenly you're faced with 20. I just can't imagine that, having to deal with that. I mean, I guess you must have got a lot of questions from people as to how you navigate a capitalist lifestyle.
Yes. Yeah. We, one question that we got a lot was, we would talk to people about Joseph Smith, and I don't know how much you know about the history of Joseph Smith, but when he was 14, he was very confused about all the different religions that were available in his town, and he didn't know which one he should join. And so we got to that part in the discussion where we talked to people about Joseph Smith, and then we asked them, have you ever felt this way before yourself? And several times, people would say, oh, yes, I feel that way right now. And, we were a little excited about thinking, oh, well, maybe they're interested in different religion. And then they would say, rather disappointed, but they would say, I don't know which brand of toilet paper to buy. And we would say, that's not a life-changing event, but, they would then ask us, is this like it is in the United States where you have, 15 different types of toilet paper, and how do I know which one to buy? And we would tell them, just pick one and try it out. And if you don't like it, pick another one. It's not that important. It's not that big a deal.
Yeah, no, incredible. You had an encounter with Steffi Graf.
I did. Yes, that was really interesting. I really wish I could say I've met her, but we were in the town of Zwickau where I was. We did a lot of street displays, street contacts, and so we would have to get a permit from the city to let us put up, easels with pictures and things, and set out some tables. And usually, what we would do is we would hand out a free Book of Mormon, and we would ask people, to take one, and then we would love to meet with them and talk to them about it. And so we set one up this day, and we had pictures and things everywhere. And here comes a group of people. There was probably 5 or 6 men. I don't know if they were security or what. And then in the middle of them was Steffi Graf. And she was walking by. She was wearing Levi's and cowboy boots. And I turned to my companion I was working with, and I said, "That's Steffi Graf." And he said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure." She was tall and slender and had blonde hair, and she had just won, the gold medal in the Olympics, and she had won I guess it was the Grand Slam. I think she had just won in tennis. And I really wish that I had actually had the courage to go up to her and say, "Hey, Miss Graf, would you like a Book of Mormon?" I could have told her that in German, and I don't know if she would have liked that. But I didn't. I chickened out a little bit. So I was really hoping that she would stop by and say hello at least.
Yeah, that's a great story. It's a great story. As so many of these are. I mean, you've got endless ones here. There was one where you're at some traffic lights or something, and you draw up next to a Soviet military vehicle.
Yes, yeah, they were all over the place, and we were just at the red light waiting there, and my companion and I were sitting in our car at this point, so I must have been in Zwickau at the time. And he turns over to the officer, and he hands him a book that's in Russian, a Book of Mormon in Russian. He shows it to him, and the officer looks at it, and he's impressed. He starts thumbing through it a little bit, and then he points to his head and said "Hut," and which means in German means hat. And so once he understood what we were asking for, he turns over to the driver of the vehicle, and he must have said something to him in Russian, like "Give him your hat" or something like that, because he took his hat off and handed it over to us. And it's a military hat. I guess it's a long one, flat, and it has like a Soviet symbol on the front of it, and on the inside it even has a needle and thread for sewing up uniforms or whatever. And I still have it in one of my boxes in here somewhere. But yeah, that was wow. Really really interesting. So,
yeah,
I was hoping for the officer's hat, but oh well.
Yeah, I can understand that. Brilliant. So October 1990's reunification, we've already talked about how that changed things. You were saying that the role got a lot more difficult, but you were in different towns then. I think you were in Jena, and you went to a place called Mirana. Can you tell me about those places?
Yeah. So Jena is it's a university town. Carl Zeiss is there, and university town. They one of the things that I noticed about Jena was they have a big tower that's built there where the university is, and I think that they were supposed to build it in the shape of binoculars, but they ran out of money, and so they just made it a telescope, which is fine too. But yeah, that was fun and interesting. Jena only had about they may have had 30 members of the church there, and only about 10 of them would come to church every Sunday, and there were a few that we just never really saw anymore at that point. But I really enjoyed my time there. We had a lot of fun there. One of the things that we did when I was in Jena actually is I went to Weimar, which is where the Buchenwald concentration camp was, and I remember going to that and just to see it. And they had already torn down all the buildings; just the foundations were left. But there was one building that kind of housed a little bit of museum information where you could see, so many shoes and things from some of the children and just clothing that was left there and things like that. But I remember when I went to the concentration camp that the information that was there that was different than what I had heard growing up in the United States. I think that at the time when the Russians were in charge or in control, the story about World War II was different than what we had heard when we were growing up in the States. And it's interesting. And some of the friends that I have who are in Jena say the same thing today, where they say that the stories are much different. Even they can tell, like, what they learned when they were younger in school was a different story from the Russians than what their children are hearing from the West Germans. And it's interesting how the information is so different, just based on your perspective, right? But they kept saying things about how the Soviets came in and helped wipe out Nazism and all that, which we thought in the United States it was us.
Yeah, I think World War II, each country sees it from their own perspective, and that Eastern Front, the scale of what went on there, completely overwhelms even events like D-Day and things like that, and even the battles on the Japanese islands in the Pacific as well. Unbelievable. The members of the church who had children, were they members of the Free German Youth, which was the sort of East German youth organisation, or did the members not allow them to be part of that? And what were the implications there? Do you know?
I do know a little bit about that. Most of the members' children did not participate in that. Most of them did not, but the ones that felt like they had to or they were required to actually did. But I do remember meeting a man who was a member of the church as well, and he kind of laughed about it and kind of joked about it before or after, when we were there. He said it wasn't funny at the time, but he said that looking back on it now, he said it was actually kind of funny that they had this and they were required to participate. But I don't remember exactly what they did, but he actually showed me a patch that he had on his jacket that had the FDJ, Free German Youth, I guess is what that stands for. Freie Deutsche Jugend. Yeah. And sometimes he would sing some of the songs and he would just laugh about them too and say, I can't believe they made us do this, kind of thing. But, and there were in some ways, there were some similarities, or at least they said there were some similarities with the Boy Scouts of America, because we put our kids in these and indoctrinate them on capitalist dogma. It's kind of how they would say it. But yeah, it's just, I didn't meet too many of them that participated into it, but some of them that felt like they had to or they were required to, they actually did.
Yeah, I think it's difficult because if you lived in East Germany and you had no idea the wall was going to come down and it was just going to be there forever and this was going to be your life forever, how you would deal with that. You'd need to be incredibly brave to be a major dissenter.
Yeah. I completely.
I'm not sure.
Completely agree.
Yeah. So December is the end of your. Oh, actually, December 91. Mm-hmm. So you're there So are you there and never go, you haven't been back to the States during this period?
No, just stayed the whole time there. I did serve in West Berlin from November of 90 to April of 91. So I was there for a good 5, maybe almost 6 months. And that was almost like going back home to the States, because West Berlin was very modernized. Everything was just like I remember back home. And there was a big culture shock for me when I went from Zwickau to Berlin, just in terms of how enormous the city is and everything that's available, all the color, all the lights, everything was just, it was just a huge culture shock for me. But, and then after that is when I went to Jena after I was in Berlin.
And when you look back at that period that you were there, what's your most memorable moment, the moment that just really sticks with you and that you're, or perhaps, what you're really proud of?
That is a great question. I would probably say the time that I was able to translate from German into Spanish. And it's, I had one person actually ask me before if I have to go from German to English to Spanish. And I said, no, I don't have time for that. I have to go directly from German to Spanish. But I had an advantage in some ways because I grew up speaking both Spanish and English at the same time. And so I wasn't having to rely upon education to get there, right? The education I had from Spanish and English was all at the same time. And so the pathways, I guess you could say, were all kind of there. Just on another note, maybe on the opposite, the things that I'm maybe not the most proud of. My companion and I one time took off our name tags once and talked into them just to see what people would think. And one person thought the Stasi was back. So, yeah,
oh, no.
Yeah, that was not a proud moment. We said, we're sorry. Yeah, we're just joking. And we put it back. But yeah, people were very scared. They were very scared that people would somebody was watching every move that they made. And I think I mentioned to you that in when I was in Gorlitz, that's when they opened up the Stasi office, so you can actually go and check your file and see what was in there. And one of the companions I was living there with, he actually went and looked at his file, and he said it was this thick, and it had everything that he did for every single day, like who he talked to and how long he talked to them and where he was and where he went to after that. And I'm still looking to see if I can get access to my file, but we'll see someday.
Yeah. And when was he there from? Was he there from the same time as you, from March?
Yeah. He'd actually been there. He had been there probably 3 months before I arrived. So he was probably there by December or January. Okay. Yeah. And he had been there a little bit longer than I was.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Eye-Opening Moments podcasts are real-life stories of adversity, encounters, and perspectives. They are moments that can lift your spirits, give you some food for thought, or move you. For the introspective mind that likes to reflect, discover, and find solutions or meaning in a complex life, listen to Eye-Opening Moments podcasts.
Yeah, it's interesting because it makes you wonder whether the Stasi still sort of was there outside of Berlin. They were, they were still able to keep the organization going. Yeah. Whereas, because you always see those images of the main headquarters in East Berlin being stormed by
that's right,
the East Berliners.
Yeah, and I don't remember exactly when that was, but that would have been, I guess that might have been in December of '89, maybe.
Yeah, I think it was pretty soon.
Yeah.
After, I think it's when things like, the newspapers and the TV channels were showing some of the corruption that had been going on and how the leaders lived. Although, I look at those leaders' homes, they look pretty modest compared to
what they could have been.
Some places, but obviously from an East German point of view, they were quite lavish, and obviously they had access to all hard currencies.
Yeah, that's true.
nice hi-fi and the latest TVs and things like that.
That's true. And they could watch Western TV if they wanted. And they could do all kinds of things. It was a completely different lifestyle than the rest of the country.
Yeah. Dresden was known as the Valley of the Clueless because they couldn't pick up West German TV signal there. So I'm wondering whether a lot of these places that you went to were also similarly sort of isolated from Western exposure because the TV signal didn't reach that far.
I certainly, Cottbus and Gorlitz would have been, because they're even further east than Dresden. And so, certainly they would have had a little more difficult time. Schwerin, where I served for a couple of months, I think 3 months, they're very close to Hamburg. And so maybe within an hour or two, something like that. So they were, and not too far from Denmark either. So they might have had a little more access there. I do remember at one point there was a brother from the church that he had satellite television and he was able to watch American TV. And this would have been probably, I'm trying to think here, trying to remember. This probably would have been about May or June of '91, something like that. When he was telling me about this, and sometimes he would talk to me about different sports events that he was able to watch on American TV and things. He's like, "Hey, did you know that this was going on?" I was like, "I'm a missionary. I don't know anything about this." But that was interesting. So they really appreciated being able to get access to Western TV when they finally were able to do that. That's interesting. You mentioned them that Dresden was the city of the clueless.
Is there anything we've missed, Ken? Any anecdotes that you think we've not touched on?
I remember at the train stations close to Cottbus, there was a restaurant there that I tried solyanka for the first time, which is a Russian soup, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fantastic. And we always saw Russians that are there. We always saw them, everywhere pretty much. And you could get Russian food and that kind of thing, which I thought was really, really, I don't know, really interesting, really fascinating to me, just to see the different types of architecture and things that were there. I think I did see the other day that there's still a statue of Lenin in Schwerin. I don't know if they've taken it down or not, but it's the only one that's still standing, from what I remember. And they just want to keep it up as kind of a memento to that history, knowing that, this was once part of their history and you can't really erase that. But, it was really a fascinating time. I really enjoyed my time there, and I was really glad to be able to have a part of it. I think that we didn't always appreciate how different the times were when we were there, and how influential it was for us to be there with some of these people. They loved seeing Americans. They loved talking to us. They loved asking us questions about things. In one of the cities I was in, they knew us as the two Americans just because we were so different from everybody else. And, it was fun. It was a wonderful time to be there.
Well, the whole suit and tie combo does make you stand out. And to be fair, it does make you look a bit CIA-like.
Yeah, it does.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Yeah. Or with good reason, right? Because, people people didn't typically wear a suit and tie. I was always struck by Soviet architecture because it was very Spartan. It was very plain, right? And it was just functional, but it wasn't very artistic. I think I sent you a picture once. Let me see if I have it. Yeah, I think I sent you a picture of us being in one of those old apartment complexes. They looked old to me, but they were actually fairly new, with just basically concrete slabs. And so we were standing there, and my companion took a picture of me standing in front of it.
Yeah, these photos are great. I particularly like the one of your friend in Mirana.
Yes. Yeah.
Looking out down that street.
Yeah.
Because some of these places must have looked like World War II had finished last week.
Yes, I know. Yes.
In terms of the battle damage. And...
Yep. Yeah. And going back to Dresden, there's a church there called the Frauenkirche, and it was destroyed in World War II. All the wood burned out, and as a result of that, the building collapsed. And it took a couple of days for it, but it finally did collapse. But they left it there. And so when I was there in Dresden, I believe, I'm trying to remember exactly when that would have been. It probably would have been April or May of 90. It was still a big pile of rocks and a big pile of bricks and things. And the Soviets had kept it up as a memorial to the war, saying this is what the war did, this is what the British and the Americans did to us, kind of a thing. And they eventually collected enough money to be able to rebuild it, and it's a beautiful building now. And lots of I think one of the things that was really touching about that was the British actually donated a new cross for the top of the church. And so when you go, if you ever go there and see that, you'll be able to see that's been done. And I think that's a beautiful gesture, of the healing that can come over time and things, the brotherhood between West Germany.
Yeah, I think it might have been donated by the city of Coventry,
I think so,
in the UK, which was not devastated to the same extent as Dresden, but had a really heavy German bombing raid that destroyed the cathedral there, which is still in ruins in Coventry, and they built a new one next to it in the 1950s, I think. So, I agree with you. I think that's a lovely gesture of reconciliation. And we have further information such as videos and links in our show notes, which will show as a link in your podcast app. Now, this show wouldn't exist without our generous Patreons, so I want to thank one and all of them for their support. You can very easily become a Patreon by going to coldwarconversations.com/donate. If you can't wait for the next episode, please visit our Facebook discussion group, where listeners just like you continue the Cold War conversation. Just search for Cold War Conversations in Facebook. Thank you very much for listening. It is really appreciated. Goodbye.